I woke before dawn, the soft hum of Charleston cicadas still weaving through the morning air. At 72, my routines are steady anchors: coffee, prayer, and the sound of my son preparing for his day. Nathaniel's footsteps moved briskly upstairs, and below, I could hear Serena bustling in the kitchen, her voice light and bright as always. Neighbors call Serena the perfect daughter-in-law: polished, attentive, never a hair out of place. To me, she was polite, even affectionate in her practiced way, though there was always something unreadable in her eyes. Still, I had welcomed her as one of my own when she married Nathaniel. That morning, the house felt unusually hurried, papers rustling, shoes tapping, Serena's laughter mixing with the clatter of pans. She handed Nathaniel his travel mug with a smile, then turned to me with another container, neatly sealed, as if it were my own. I tucked it into my bag without a thought, touched by what I assumed was her thoughtfulness. The streets were just waking as I began my walk. Spanish moss hung low from the oaks, the air still damp with night's dew. My steps carried me to the small grocery on the corner where Ephraim Whitlock often sat, reading his paper. He looked up, his white hair catching the early light, and greeted me with the warmth of a friend who has known all my seasons. With a chuckle, I pulled the box from my bag. "Look what Serena packed me. She's too good to me." I opened it, expecting the familiar comfort of a sandwich or fruit. Instead, my eyes caught on strange white granules clinging to the rim. Ephraim leaned forward, frowning. He pinched a few between his fingers, rubbed them, and his expression shifted to one of sudden dread. "Isolde?" he whispered, voice hoarse. "This isn't sugar. Take Nathaniel to the hospital immediately." I forced a laugh, brushing him off, but unease twisted inside me. I snapped the lid shut, and as I rose, something on the pavement drew my eye: a small sparrow, lifeless, crumbs scattered near its beak. The breakfast in my bag grew heavy, as though it carried a secret too dark to name. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. I sat on the edge of the chair, clutching the plastic bag with the breakfast box inside, as though it might burst open and reveal its secret to the world. When the doctor finally approached, his face was solemn. He laid the test results on the table between us and spoke carefully, as if each word weighed heavily on his tongue. "Mrs. Harrington, your neighbor was right. The food contained traces of arsenic. It appears to have been introduced gradually, small doses that, over time, would severely weaken whoever ate it." My hands trembled. "My son," I whispered. "It was meant for my son," the doctor nodded gravely. He urged me to bring Nathaniel in for a full checkup. He explained the symptoms: fatigue, stomach cramps, headaches. Each word pierced me like a needle, because I had heard them all before, tumbling casually from Nathaniel's lips whenever he came home from the office. The drive back felt endless. Charleston's streets blurred past me, live oaks bending overhead like mourners. Nathaniel had always been so strong, so capable. The thought of him carrying poison in his veins while I brushed off his complaints as overwork crushed me with guilt. That evening, I prepared a simple supper for myself: boiled vegetables, bread, nothing elaborate. Serena arrived in the kitchen with a tray, her smile flawless as ever. "I made something special for Nathaniel," she said sweetly. My son, weary but smiling, sat at the table and thanked her warmly. He ate with trust, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I forced myself to sit quietly, to sip my tea and nod at their conversation, but my gaze never left the plate in front of him. Each bite he took made my throat tighten. Later, I excused myself earlier than usual, pressing my handbag to my chest as I retreated to my room. Inside, the box lay silent, no longer a token of Serena's attentiveness, but a silent witness, an accusing object heavy with suspicion. It was then that I knew I could not keep this secret to myself much longer. The next morning, I rose with a heaviness pressing on my chest. Sleep had offered no refuge. Every creak of the house had sounded like a whisper of warning. I found myself dialing Clarendon Shaw, my lawyer of 30 years, before breakfast had even cooled. His voice was steady, professional, and though he asked no questions, I could tell he sensed the urgency in mine. By late morning, I was seated in his office, surrounded by tall shelves of leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of old paper. Clarendon adjusted his spectacles and slid a familiar folder across the polished oak desk. "This is the most recent draft of your will, Isolde, signed just last year." My hands felt cold as I turned the pages. Line after line blurred before my eyes until I reached the section that split my estate. The cottage I had made into a home, the modest publishing investment I had nurtured with pride, and the stocks accumulated slowly over a lifetime, all were to be divided equally between Nathaniel and Serena. But then came the clause that stole my breath. If Nathaniel were to die first, Serena would inherit everything. Memories stirred Serena leaning close at dinner, asking casually about the rising property values in our neighborhood. Serena's lilting voice inquiring about dividend payments from the publishing house, smiling as though the questions were mere conversation. I had once thought her curiosity endearing, proof she cared about the family's stability. Now, each recollection felt like a thread in a darker tapestry. Clarendon's voice cut through my thoughts. "You may amend this at any time, Isolde, but be careful. Abrupt changes, if noticed, could create tension or worse, suspicion from those watching closely." His words carried more weight than the legal paper in my hands. I closed the folder slowly, nodding, though my stomach twisted. As I stepped back onto Charleston's streets, the air felt heavy. Spanish moss swayed gently above me, but instead of comfort, it seemed like a curtain lowering on a stage I had never realized I was standing on. I walked home with the certainty that nothing in my house was as it seemed. By the time the sun dipped low, I found myself knocking on Ephraim Whitlock's door. He opened it slowly, his posture bent but his eyes sharp as ever. I stepped inside, my hands trembling around the folder I still carried from Clarendon's office. Without preamble, I told him everything: the will, the test results, the faint signs of Nathaniel's decline. He listened without interruption, nodding gravely as though he had heard such stories before. When I finished, he leaned forward in his armchair, his voice low but steady. "Poisoners rely on trust, Isolde. They hide in plain sight, and the perfect caregiver, that's the mask they wear." The words clung to me as I walked home. That evening, I forced myself to watch Serena more carefully. In the kitchen, she tipped a small vial into Nathaniel's morning smoothie, swirling it in with a wooden spoon. My heart jolted, but she looked up with a bright smile when Nathaniel entered, pressing the glass into his hands with tender insistence. Later, from the porch, I heard her voice in hurried tones. "It must be soon. The money can't wait." She ended the call quickly, her expression smoothing into serenity when she stepped back inside. And yet, when I replayed the scene in my mind, uncertainty gnawed at me. What if the powder was no more than vitamins? What if the words were about some trivial matter? A bill or a loan? What if my age and grief were twisting shadows into monsters? The doubt only deepened when I remembered Millie, the housekeeper we dismissed years ago after catching her stealing from my jewelry box. She had spat words of spite that day, muttering she would get even with this family. Could she have tampered with something in the kitchen? Was I looking in the wrong direction entirely? By the time I lay in bed that night, every possibility weighed on me, truth and paranoia mingling so tightly I could no longer separate one from the other. The silence of the house felt heavy, pressing down, and I knew sleep would not come easily. The next morning, I called Clarendon and asked him to visit the house. My voice carried a deliberate firmness, one meant not just for his ears, but for anyone else who might be listening. When he arrived that afternoon, his leather briefcase in hand, I ushered him into the parlor where the windows were open and the air carried easily into the hallway. I spoke louder than necessary, projecting my words toward the kitchen. Clarendon, I've made up my mind. I can't leave everything to Nathaniel and Serena. It's time my estate served a greater purpose. I want most of it to go to a foundation for widows of veterans. They've lost more than any of us can imagine. Clarendon glanced at me, understanding immediately that my words were staged. He adjusted his glasses and nodded. A noble cause? Isolde, I'll prepare the documents. 80% to the foundation. You said I didn't have to wait long for the reaction. Serena walked past the doorway, carrying a basket of folded laundry. She froze mid-step, the color draining from her face before she quickly forced a smile. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt, she said lightly, though her grip on the basket had turned her knuckles white. That evening, she outdid herself in the kitchen. A roast glistened on the table, bowls of vegetables steamed, and a chocolate torte waited for dessert. She poured Nathaniel a glass of wine with exaggerated gentleness, brushing his shoulder with her hand. Nathaniel laughed softly. Serena is really spoiling us lately. He reached for her hand, gratitude plain in his eyes. I forced a smile, though the roast on my plate might as well have been ash. Serena's laughter rang through the dining room, warm and melodic. But all I felt was the icy knowledge that beneath her performance, fear had begun to stir. It was then I realized the trap had been set, and Serena had taken the bait. Ephraim arrived before dawn with a knapsack slung over his shoulder and an old toolbox that smelled of liniment and lemon oil. He moved with surprising nimbleness for a man his age, and together we found a corner beneath the upper cabinet where a small camera could watch the stove without being noticed. He showed me how to hide the wires behind a jar of wooden spoons, how to angle the lens so it would catch any hand that reached for the pot. I felt childish and conspiratorial, and, at the same time, oddly fierce. This was my house, and I would not let fear be its only ruler. The first day, the footage gave me nothing but ordinary domesticity. Serena hummed as she stirred, tasting and nodding, plating a bowl for Nathaniel with the practiced grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She wiped the counter, set a napkin with the flourish of a hostess, and kissed my son on the cheek before he left for work. I watched the playback with my fingers clenched around a cup of tea, heart thudding for evidence that did not appear. I almost laughed at myself for plotting like a woman in a cheap mystery. Perhaps I had been wrong. Perhaps I was filtering shadows through grief. That night, sleep was thin and talon sharp. Doubt crawled into my bones. Had I allowed fear to blind me to the truth that Serena was simply kind? That Nathaniel's ailments were the result of stress, not malice? I walked the house in the dark, touching the banister as if steadied by the familiarity of wood. Ephraim found me on the kitchen steps and said nothing. His silence was weighty and certain in a way that words rarely are. It was the following afternoon, when rain stitched the windows with a restless rhythm, that Ephraim called me with a voice that shook. He had watched the new footage twice before he dared to speak. He put the tablet in my trembling hands, and I saw, in slow, deliberate motion, Serena tilt a slim vial toward the pot. Her hand was unhurried, practiced, the movement of someone who had done this before. She stirred as if nothing had happened, then wiped her hands and smiled when Nathaniel walked in. For a long minute, I could not breathe. The mask had cracked, I pressed my forehead to the cool kitchen tile and felt the thin line between dread and resolve harden into purpose. Detective Rowena Mercer came to the house the next morning, her presence filling the parlor with the chill of authority. She was a tall woman with clipped words and eyes that missed nothing. She listened carefully as Ephraim showed her the footage, then folded her hands. It's strong, but not enough. We need her voice, her intent. Set the bait, then let her incriminate herself. Her plan was simple, but it demanded more from us than I thought my heart could bear. Nathaniel would have to pretend to fall ill, collapsing under the very roof where he had trusted his wife most. He agreed with a quiet nod, though I could see the hurt etched across his face. That evening, Serena set a steaming bowl of soup before him. "I made this especially for you," she said, with her radiant smile, brushing her hand across his shoulder. Nathaniel lifted the spoon, stirred once, and tasted a sip. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten as he swallowed, then pressed his palm to his stomach. The performance began. He groaned softly, then louder, clutching his side and staggering backward. His face contorted as he sank into the chair, spilling water across the table. Finally, he collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud. Serena gasped and rushed to his side, her cries echoing through the dining room. "Nathaniel, speak to me," she wailed, pressing her hands to his chest. Yet in that moment, before she forced tears into her eyes, I saw it, an almost imperceptible flicker of relief pass over her face. My heart shattered. My son lay still, pretending death, and the woman he loved betrayed herself in a single breath. I heard it, soft but searing, as she leaned closer to him, her lips near his ear. Finally, "It will all be mine." The microphones, hidden in the lamp and beneath the rug, captured every word. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands digging into the wood, knowing the trap had been sprung and the mask could never be put back on. The ambulance wailed through the Charleston streets, Nathaniel lying still on the stretcher, pale under the dim fluorescent lights. I sat at his side, gripping his hand as though my strength alone could keep him tethered to life. In truth, he was breathing calmly, every rise and fall rehearsed, but my heart didn't know how to separate the act from reality. To me, he was once again the small boy I had carried through fevers and nightmares. At the hospital, everything unfolded exactly as Detective Mercer had arranged. Undercover officers in crisp coats moved with practiced efficiency. Wires were connected. Monitors lit up, and one screen flatlined with an ominous tone. My stomach twisted at the sound. It was too real. With trembling fingers, I typed the message that would decide everything. Nathaniel didn't make it. The reply was silence. Minutes later, Serena burst into the room. Her hair was disheveled, mascara streaking her cheeks, but her sobs carried no weight. She collapsed against me, arms tight, her voice a hollow wail. "Oh, Mother, how could this happen?" I did not answer. I only guided her toward the bed where Nathaniel lay beneath the thin sheet, his skin made ghostly by a touch of makeup. Serena leaned over him, pressing her lips near his ear. "At last, it's over," she whispered. The words struck me like a blade, and then Nathaniel's eyes snapped open. He sat upright, tearing the sheet from his chest. Serena screamed, staggering backward, her hands clawing the air as though she'd seen a ghost rise. The door swung wide. Detective Mercer entered, flanked by two officers, their presence filling the room with finality. Mercer's voice was steady, unforgiving. "Serena Whitlock, you are under arrest." Lab reports, the footage from the kitchen, and her own whispered confession spilled across the table before her. Serena's knees buckled. The mask of grace and devotion crumbled at last. I stood rooted, torn between fury and sorrow, as my son clasped my hand, alive yet scarred forever. The days that followed Serena's arrest blurred into a haze of headlines, whispers, and pointed glances. Charleston's genteel calm rippled with scandal. Neighbors who once praised Serena's elegance now shook their heads in disbelief. A socialite turned schemer. One paper called her, splashing her picture across the front page. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polish, the air thick with curiosity. I sat beside Nathaniel, my hand steadying his even as he tried to appear composed. Serena entered in a plain suit, her wrists free, but her pride shackled. Her eyes sought Nathaniel, but he looked past her, jaw set like stone. When her attorney rose, Serena's voice rang out, practiced and sharp. It was vitamins, not poison. My husband was tired. I was only trying to help him regain strength. A murmur rippled through the benches. For a moment, I wondered if anyone might believe her. But then Mercer stepped forward with the evidence. The video of Serena tilting a vial into soup. The recording of her whisper, finally. It will all be mine. The forensic report confirming arsenic. Each piece layered over the last until her defense sagged beneath its own emptiness. Nathaniel took the stand. His voice trembled at first, then gained strength. I loved her. I trusted her. But love doesn't survive betrayal. She was poisoning not just my body, but everything we built together. His words hung in the silence, raw and unpolished, cutting deeper than any lab result could. I felt my throat tighten, but I knew what I had to do. The very next week, with Clarendon Shaw by my side, I amended my will again. My estate would pass to Nathaniel's future children, if God granted them, and to a literacy fund for women who had never been given a chance at books the way I had. It was the only way I knew to turn poison into something life-giving. And as I left the courthouse that day, the moss above me swaying gently in the breeze, I sensed that justice had only begun its slow work. The seasons turned, and with them the heaviness in our house began to lift. Winter's chill gave way to spring's soft light, and with each passing day, Nathaniel grew stronger. The color returned to his face. His step no longer slowed by weakness. Watching him laugh again, really laugh, was like seeing a window thrown open after months of stale air. Yet beneath the laughter, I could still sense the shadows lingering. Scars never fully vanish. They simply settle deeper into the skin. One April morning, I sat in the garden beneath the magnolia tree, its blossoms wide and fragrant above me. The air was warm, carrying the salt of the nearby harbor, mingled with the sweetness of the blooms. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet hum of bees, grateful for peace after so much turmoil. Nathaniel joined me, lowering himself into the chair beside mine. For a while, he said nothing, just breathed in the morning air as though relearning the rhythm of life. Then, softly, he spoke. You saved my life. Mother. I turned to him, my chest tight with emotion. His eyes, once dulled by fatigue, now held clarity again. I reached for his hand, the same hand I had held when he was a child, guiding him across streets and through storms. I squeezed it gently. We saved each other, I murmured. The truth weighed heavy inside me. My vigilance had cost us trust, had demanded sacrifices neither of us should have been forced to make. And yet, it was vigilance that had kept him alive. There is no easy balance, only the fragile line between love and ruin, between suspicion and faith. As the day waned, the rooftops of Charleston glowed beneath the settling sun, painting the city in gold and crimson. I leaned back, watching the light fade, and whispered to myself, we survived. Love survived. And though my voice was quiet, I knew it carried the strength of every vigil I had kept, and every promise I would keep still.